Hey everybody, it's Overkill here with the, well, finally here with the Tomb Kings faction video. So we're back with the Warhammer factions. There's only one more after this one, which is Demons, and I'm not quite sure how I can do that one because I honestly don't think the Demons will be their own faction. I think they're going to be rolled in with Chaos when they're finally implemented, because to my understanding, it doesn't make a lot of sense for demons to be their own faction. But anyway, that's not for this video. We'll get into that in the next one, which will be soon, hopefully. So for anyone that hasn't been keeping up with the channel but has been waiting for this video, I've been away for about a week and a half, basically. By the time you watch this, it might be more. I don't know. But I just couldn't get this done because I didn't have enough time at the computer, and between getting my other series done, which to me is a bit more important because it's an everyday thing, whereas this is a get it as done as quickly as I possibly can kind of thing. It did take the series did take they were more important to get done than this, so I have the script done now, so we're working on this video. So yeah, thank you for your patience. Thank you all who stuck around after watching my videos and then found some more that you were interested in watching. I've seen some familiar faces from my Warhammer videos watching my other series, which is great. So yeah, thank you, you guys are awesome. But anyway, let's get into this. So we're talking about the characteristics of the Tomb Kings first. They are the second undead faction, the other being the Vampire Counts, of course. They are slightly similar to the Vampire Counts in army style, where they have lots of cheap undead skeletons and such, backed by very powerful monsters and magic. An advantage that the Tomb Kings have over the Vampire Counts, of course, is the fact that they have archers and artillery. So a really annoying thing, I don't know what to say. A bad, annoying thing happened about the Vampire Counts reveal, where people were just pissed off saying, "Oh, where's the archers? Where's the catapults? Oh my god, what's going on?" Vampire Counts do not have archers or artillery. That is the Tomb Kings. And anyone who's making videos or posts saying that the Vampire Counts should have archers and artillery, and calls himself someone who's really fond of the lore and saying everything should be like the lore, go away. Honestly, like it's quite annoying seeing so many people contradict themselves with their opinions, saying that everything should be right but at the same time saying that they should change things. Just stay one way or the other. God, it's weird. Anyway, but yeah, they have an advantage over the Vampire Counts having archers and catapults, which makes them. It's funny in the tabletop, but before, when fantasy was still actually a game, of course. The Tomb Kings aren't the strongest faction. They're actually kind of lower on the scale of like balance, basically. So it's quite interesting because Tomb Kings have more options for what they can do, but Vampire Counts are stronger in their abilities. So I guess that's what happens. But in Warhammer, I think in Total War, I think they're going to be really powerful. But anyway, we move on to the next point. Ranting on a little bit. One wizard in your army must be designated as a Hierophant. This is just a rank saying that he's better than the other casters. If he dies, the army begins to crumble, similar to the Vampire Counts. But unlike the Counts, any other wizards in your army do not stop the crumbling effect. It is permanent if you lose your Hierophant. So in the Vampire Counts army, if you lose your general, say it's a necromancer or a vampire lord or something, your army will start crumbling. But if you have more casters, the next turn you won't start crumbling anymore. That's in the tabletop, of course. So we don't really know how it'll work in Total War because we've only seen battles with one character now. I don't know if you lose like a lord and then your hero casters picks it up and your crumbling stops, because we've seen that if your lord dies, from Manfred and Heinrich, if he dies, the army instantly crumbles. All of it dies. So hopefully they implement the stopping of crumbling, but in the Tomb Kings that doesn't happen. If the Hierophant dies, you're screwed. Your army is dying. So you definitely need to make sure that your Hierophant is safe and your other casters can be put in harm's way. It won't affect your army as much. As we mentioned earlier, they are undead, meaning all of the new features that we've seen for the Vampire Counts units will be implemented for these guys as well, meaning no fatigue, no morale, and crumbling, as we mentioned earlier. So, yeah, fun. One of the armies that is most reliant on hammer and anvil, they have lots of cheap infantry, and they require war machines and monsters to flank and destroy the enemy. So these skeletons that they have definitely aren't the greatest fighters in the world. They're tough. Obviously, they have no morale, but they will crumble if they're losing combat and such. But they're literally just there for tar pits, basically, to slow down enemy units, and then you can flank them with things such as powerful monsters, chariots, and stuff like that. They have access to the unique lore of Nehekara, which is a buff and a buff and debuff. It's like called in the lore like cantations and curses or something. It's a buff and debuff lore that passively heals your units around your casters, so that's pretty cool. And finally, the Tomb Kings occupy Nehekara, a land just south of the Badlands, and they are the undisputed rulers of much of that area. So, after talking about that, let's move on to geography. So, they live in Nehekara, as I said. Nehekara was an ancient empire and the site of the first human civilization. It is now known as the Land of the Dead and is the empire of the Tomb Kings under Setra the Imperishable. It is located far to the south of the Old World, beyond the greenskin-infested Badlands. It borders Araby to the west and the Southlands to the south. Well, what a surprise there. The undead outnumber the living in Nehekara many times over. It is a desert land where harsh storms batter the people and damage the buildings. Life is hard, but in some places where the desert recedes, life can be pleasant. The Great Mortis River flows through the land, allowing a good deal of trade to pass down it to the interior. The kings of Nehekara and the subservient kings of the other cities ruled the land for about 1,500 years. Their kings ruled over great and magnificent cities, and Nehekara went through periods of both prosperity and wealth. But the king of the greatest city, Setra of Khemri, desired immortality and ordered his priests to find and unlock the secret of eternal life. Huge buildings called pyramids were built to entomb the dead kings and queens so that they would one day awake in paradise. This obsession with death permeated their culture and drove Nehekara to extremes. The Nehekarans worshipped a large pantheon of gods, only a few of which are still remembered in modern times, Nehekaran gods. Nehekara is based on and takes many influences from real-world ancient Egypt, if you could believe that. Long ago, in times forgotten to nearly all in the old world, the great necromancer Nagash waged a series of war with the Nehekarans. Nehekara was a fertile kingdom, but after centuries of war with him, Nagash, being defeated, cursed the land, which slew the populace and turned much of Nehekara into a desolate wasteland. The capital of Nehekara is the city of Khemri. This is where High King Setra takes residence. So, yeah, with all that out of the way, you can see that Nehekara is no longer a really nice place. It's mostly covered in desert. Everyone's dead. Not everyone, but a huge majority of the population is dead. So due to all this stuff, the curse of Nagash and all that stuff, I believe that anybody coming into Nehekara and just the Southlands in general, like that area of the map, it's just going to be major attrition for anybody with any faction that isn't immune to it, basically. So, of course, in the Chaos Wastes and stuff, armies take attrition, so I can imagine down in the Land of the Dead that living armies would definitely not thrive there very well. So it should be pretty interesting to see. So we've got geography out of the way. We now move on to government, and government's pretty simple for the Tomb Kings. They are ruled by Setra, the greatest of the Tomb Kings. Setra has undisputed rule of the land, as most of the other kings and princes slumber in their burial pyramids until they are needed by Setra or the mortuary cult in war. The mortuary cult is made up of the Lich Priests, a group of powerful wizards trapped in eternal undeath due to their attempts to learn how to prevent death at the command of Setra when he was a living man. Due to the cult being created by Setra, the priests are held in high esteem in Tomb King nobility and politics. They usually act as advisors. They are the only subjects in the Tomb King's empire that cannot be executed. Although civil war is rare now in the lands of Nehekara, some kings do deny Setra his complete rule, most notable being Arkan the Black, one of Nagash's favorite commanders. He holds lands surrounding the Black Tower. Lands in the middle of Setra's empire. In times of treachery, Arkan is just a short march from the capital of Khemri, making him a huge threat to Setra. Arkan could be easily destroyed if the combined might of Setra's empire could be brought down on him, but many kings refuse to enter open conflict with him, as they see him as a very important, if not untrustworthy, ally. So with that out of the way, we now move on to religion, and the Tomb Kings worship a rather large pantheon of gods. There are many Nehekaran gods and goddesses in the mythology of the Tomb Kings of Khemri, taking hundreds of different forms. These can include natural phenomena, such as stars, the moon, the sun, etc., or animals of the desert. Most of their gods are only remembered because of blessing on the military, as all gods relating to average life have been nullified since normal life was destroyed by the curse of Nagash. The gods are represented in a way similar to most cultures, but very different at the same time. The Ushabti statues are designed in the form of their gods, and as such inspire faith in the warriors. For to see their gods marching at their side to battle strengthens their resolve. They are animated by the Lich Priests prior to the battle. A few of the most important gods are Asaf, Petra, Shapesh, and Kasar. So now we move on to the roster, or the military section in general. So on the screen right now you can see the roster that I've put together. It is incorporating all of the units that are available in the 8th edition Tomb King's army book. So yeah, some of these might not make it into the game. We already know units that aren't in the game, such as Vampire Counts, Mortis Engine, and other random stuff like that, and like Squig Hoppers for Greenskins, stuff like that. Anyway, some of these units might not make it in. In specific, a couple of the monsters probably won't. But anyway, let's just get right into this. So for our legendary lords, we have Cetra, the Imperishable, the King of Kings of Nehekara, or Nehekara, whatever. We have High Queen Khalida. We have Grand Hierophant Katep, and possibly Arkan the Black. I mentioned earlier that Arkan is a really big problem for the Tomb Kings, but he still is a Lord level character for the Tomb Kings in the tabletop. So it's very interesting that he's a Lord. You can use him to lead armies. So maybe Arkan the Black will be a legendary Lord. We're still going to talk about him, but maybe he'll just be like I don't even know. Maybe he'll be someone that you need to take out in the campaign. I'm not quite sure because we don't know anything about this faction yet for Warhammer, of course, or Total War. So with them out of the way, we are going to talk about them later. Of course, that's the last section of this video. We are going to talk about lords. So first for the lords, we have the Tomb King himself, or themselves, whatever. So these are the different commanders, rulers of different parts of Nehekara. They all swear fealty to Cetra, who is the High King, King of Kings, whatever. But most of them don't actually even stay active. They stay in their burial pyramids. Until they're really needed to lead armies and such, where they'll then be raised up by the Lich Priests. So yeah, these are just going to be your standard leaders of armies. They're going to be melee lords and stuff, and they have an interesting rule in the tabletop, which probably won't transfer over to Total War that well. But if they join units, they make that unit fight as well as the Tomb King himself, so it doubles the skill basically of most of the infantry units that he can join. So I don't know, maybe they'll give him buffs for units that are around him and such, who knows. But you can see him there. They have options for like hand weapons and shields, halberds, stuff like that. So yeah, should be interesting. We then have for the Lord the Lich High Priest. Now this is the highest level, just generic caster, of course, the only one being the hero version, the Lich Priest. And these will usually be your Hierophant, which I mentioned earlier, that are like the leaders of your army. They have access to the lore of Nehekara, light, the lore of light, and the lore of death. But if they are the Hierophant, they have to take Nehekara. Whoever is your Hierophant needs to take the lore of Nehekara. So we then move on to heroes. It's one of the smallest lord sections of any of the army. So first off, we have the Tomb Prince. Now the princes are the sons of the Tomb King, so they are of course next in line to become the king, of course, if the Tomb King is ever fully destroyed, which they can be. If you burn a Tomb King, no matter what it is, skeleton, king, Lich Priest, whatever, if you burn them, they get destroyed, and that is considered the only true way to kill one of the Tomb King's creations, not creations, but one of their models. And that's something that I didn't mention. They are very weak against flaming attacks. Pretty much all of their models suffer from the flammable rule, which means it just does extra damage when they're hit by flaming attacks. So yeah, watch out for that. But yeah, they're just a lower version of the king. They have the same abilities, really. Same weapon options, which is a great weapon, which is like a halberd basically. Actually, no, halberds are different. So a great weapon, a flail, and a spear. They can also take shields and magic items and such. So all these screens that we've been seeing recently with the character screens, giving equipment and stuff, it's going to be really cool piecing your characters together. I'm really excited for that. But yeah, so then we have the Tomb Herald. Now the Tomb Herald is a protector of a Tomb King or Prince, depending on who you bring. and only one can become the protector of said prince or king. And he basically, if he's in the same unit as a king or prince, you can roll, and wounds directed towards the king or prince can be put on him. Basically, he's just a way to get extra wounds onto a character. And he's also, of course, quite skilled in combat. But yeah, it's quite interesting. I'm not quite sure if they'll be in the game. Honestly, Lich Priests, Tomb Princes, and then the other one that we're going to talk about would probably make more sense. But who knows? The Tomb Herald might be in there. He is an interesting character. We then have Lich Priests, which are literally just a step down from the High Priest. Again, they have Nehekara, Light, and Death lores. And if they are your Hierophant, they must take Nehekara as well. So, yeah. We then have the final hero, and that is the Necrotect. Now, a Necrotect were the artisans of the Nehekaran Empire before it was destroyed by Nagash, basically. What they would do in the awkward time where most of the people of Nehekara were alive, but they were still practicing with the whole undeath thing, they would build the burial pyramids for kings, and they would be executed, or not executed. They would be sacrificed. They'd be killed, basically, and they'd be buried in the tomb. In like a big honor thing, like, oh, look, thank you for building me this awesome tomb, now you can live forever, blah 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 blah. But of course, now that the curse of Nagash has risen all of the dead, they're just really pissed off because a lot of their work has been destroyed by centuries of neglect and just war and such. So they have hatred, and they give hatred to units around them as well. So basically, he's just gonna be a big buff guy. He's gonna make units better in combat and such, and he also has the Stone Shaper special rule, which makes Ushabti and other units better in combat as well. So very interesting. It could be pretty cool to see them in. So then we just take a look at mounts as well. There's only 3. The Skeletal Steed, which is something that Lich Priests, Heralds, and Princes and Kings can take. We then have the Kemrian War Sphinx, which princes and kings can take. And then we have the Chariot, which heralds, princes, and kings can take. So there you go. So we're done with the lords and heroes. We now move on to melee infantry. So first off, we have the Skeleton Warriors. Now, Skeleton Warriors are your run-of-the-mill, just cheap skeleton unit. Just like the Vampire Counts, they're going to come in 2 units, hand weapons and spears. And like the Vampire Counts as well, they're terrible fighters. They're literally just there to soak up enemy fire, or just to bog down units so that they can be flanked by your more powerful units. But all around, they are going to be a pretty cool unit. They are going to suffer. All the units are going to suffer from crumbling and such, just like the Vampire Counts in combat if they're losing. So you can look out for that. We then have the Tomb Guard. Now, the Tomb Guard are a more elite skeleton unit. They're on par. They're basically the same as the Grave Guard. You can see there's a lot of similarities between the armies. And they have options as well. They can have hand weapons, which is like swords and all that stuff, or they can have halberds. So there's going to be 2 options for them as well. They can take magic standards, which we've seen in the Greenskins campaign focus, I believe. People are the person putting standards on units, which is pretty cool. And yeah, they're just basically a little bit better in combat, although they're not great. But if you put a Tomb King in this unit, it basically doubles their weapon skill, so they become a lot more effective. But yeah, again, in Total War, you can't join units, so I don't know how that's really going to work. But basically, they're just a more elite infantry, so later on in the game, you can make this your standard infantry and then flank with your more powerful units. So then we have ranged infantry, and all we have are the skeleton archers. Now, these are literally just skeleton warriors with bows. Nothing really too special. The only thing that's special about them is they're cheap, of course, and they have a special rule called Arrows of Asaph. So what this means is in Warhammer, there are bonuses and negatives to certain situations when you're shooting, such as if you're on a hill, if the enemy has cover, if they have if they're a large target, stuff like that. But the Arrows of Asaph ignore all of those, so they're always hitting on the same thing, which is quite interesting. It makes them decent archers. They're definitely not the best in Warhammer, but it is very nice. Like if you have enemy units hiding behind cover, you can still hit them without any penalty. If your units are like really tough, they can still hit them. Stuff like that. Long range doesn't affect them. They shoot at their full range without any negatives and stuff like that. So it's quite interesting to see how those will work in the game, of course. So then we move on to cavalry, and for cavalry we have skeleton horsemen. Now skeleton horsemen are, as the name suggests, they're just mounted skeletons. And this is going to be your melee cav, basically. It doesn't really get much better than this. They have hand weapons, spears, and shields, so they're going to be an anti-cav unit. In terms of total war, spear cav usually do have a bonus versus cavalry, so they should be pretty decent. So yeah, on the tabletop they have the Vanguard rule, which means that they can take some early movement in the beginning of the match. So interestingly enough, the direwolves shown in the Sword of Unholy Power battle, they have Vanguard, so they were able to do the guerrilla deployment of other Total War games. So if skeleton horsemen can do it, that'd be pretty interesting. But of course, they're just your very light cav. They have like no armor basically, so they won't be the toughest guys in the world, but they are undead, so it is going to be interesting. We then have skeleton horse archers, and this is literally just the same kind of unit, only with bows and the arrows of Asaph special rule, which is quite nice. So again, anytime there's horse archers, I just got to mention, you aren't getting away from horse archers in Total War Warhammer, that's for sure. A few factions do have horse archers, which is probably going to be a pain because they're probably going to be really powerful like they already are in Total War games, so that should be kind of scary, but yeah, so that's them. We then have the final cavalry unit, which is skeleton chariots. Now these are the are definitely the best cavalry that that they can get, of course, but if you could call chariots cavalry, of course, but they are going to be running around shooting at people, stabbing people, because there's crew that have bows and spears on this thing. But yeah, in combat they're going to be running around, running into ranks of the enemies, just pummeling every you know chariots in old Total War games. They're really powerful, and this isn't going to be any different, of course. They're going to be really strong. Light infantry killers, basically. Packed heavy infantry aren't going to be so worried about seeing these things, but if you have archers or light infantry that's spread out, these guys could do a lot of damage. So the first monstrous cavalry we have are the Necropolis Knights. It's actually the only monstrous cavalry, but the Necropolis Knights are basically tomb guard that ride giant snake statues. So these are quite interesting looking. They hold on to their mount with one hand. They have a rope hooked into the statue, and they have a heavy spear that just absolutely destroys anything that it hits. And they're just going to be really interesting because these things are going to be tough as hell because they're made of stone. They have a 3+ save in the tabletop, which is really good in terms of saves. And it's going to be interesting because, of course, the Necro Serpent, which is what it's riding, itself is dangerous in combat, and the guy on top, its weapon, is going to be very devastating. And the Necro Serpents also have poison, so we know that poison's in the game. It does damage over time, I think, or it does extra damage to infantry or something like that. So it's going to be pretty interesting. You can see from the pictures they look really cool. So then we move on to monstrous infantry, and we have the Ushabti. Now Ushabti are big statues of the gods of Nehekara. And I mean, if you look at them, you can see the resemblance to ancient Egyptian statues and artwork and such. But these guys have huge weapons that are just carve through people, and they can also have bows, which are extremely powerful, as you could imagine, something that size firing a bow. And they're just quite armor piercing. The strength of the bow itself is enough to pierce through most enemy armor, and yeah, they're going to be really interesting. It's going to be really cool to see. These are probably going to be on the scale of crypt horrors and trolls in terms of unit size. I think that's what they'd be related to. So yeah, definitely look out for them. They're going to be really dangerous. So then we move on to the biggest section of the Tomb King's army, the monsters. So first we have a Tomb Swarm, and a Tomb Swarm is just a bunch of random creatures that but a bunch of undead creatures that come out of the tombs. They may not even be in the game, honestly. We haven't seen any other swarm units, I don't believe, so far. So I don't think they'll really be in the game, but you know, they're there just in case they do want to add it or not. We then move on to the Tomb Scorpion. Now the Tomb Scorpion is interesting. It's this huge stone scorpion that comes out of the sand. So basically, I guess that means it'll have guerrilla deployment in Total War Warhammer, because in the tabletop later in the game you can bring it in from any point on the tabletop, or on the board. So that could be behind the enemy, wherever. And they're quite cool. You can imagine a giant scorpion stinging people and chopping people in half with its claws would be pretty cool. And I think there'll be a pretty powerful anti-infantry monster. So next up we have the Kemrian War Sphinx. Now this is one of my favorite Tomb Kings models. It's this huge Sphinx creature with a howdah on the back that has like 4, I don't know, warriors in the back, and they're just stabbing out, attacking everybody around them. And yeah, like the War Sphinx itself is just going to be an absolute beast in combat. They're going to be ripping through ranks of infantry and just they breathe fire. They have a poisonous tail. They're just going to do a bunch of attacks and do a lot of damage to anybody that they encounter, basically. So light armored troops against that flame attack are going to be absolutely destroyed. The thing is just going to rip through enemy infantry, and of course the howdah crew have these really long spears to attack as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing this brought to life in Total War Warhammer. I can't wait for the Tomb Kings to be added in. So then we have two controversial units. Not controversial, but one of them it kind of is. We have the Necrolith Colossus, which you can see it has a model, and the Hero Titan, which does not have a model. So I can already draw the assumption that the Hero Titan is not going to be in the game, or Hero Titan, whatever it is, because anybody that doesn't have a model hasn't been introduced in the Total War Warhammer faction so far, and that has to do with GW. Unless Games Workshop, which they won't because Warhammer Fantasy isn't a thing anymore, unless they go through the trouble of modeling a character for Creative Assembly cannot use things that don't have a model, because people in the past, third-party companies have made models okay, let me just explain this. Games Workshop has the tendency to release rules for characters and models and units without making models for them. So they're like, hey, if you come into our store, you can use GW models as that, blah, blah, blah. So third-party companies have gone through the trouble of creating their own models, which look great. Some of them look great, so people can buy and use for those models. Because why wouldn't you? It's whatever. And GW has sued like basically anybody that they've seen doing that. So CA, unless they get a go-ahead from Games Workshop to make models themselves, they're not going to be in, because why would they bother when they can just have the other thing? So the Necrolith Colossus is basically just a giant. That's it's a bone giant. In older editions, it was called the Bone Giant. And these are just going to act as your giant. Basically, they don't follow the same rules as giants, but that's what they are, essentially. That's what they're going to represent in the Tomb King's army. They can have bows, which is interesting. You can imagine a bow from that thing would be pretty dangerous. And just to talk about, the Hero Titan is basically a bone giant mage. It has some spells that it can cast. It doesn't have access to lores. It just has some infused spells that it can cast. So it would be cool to see them, but again, they don't have an official model, so we probably won't see them in the game. So for the final monster, we have possibly one of the coolest, and that is the Necro Sphinx. Now, just look at that thing. Isn't that cool? Basically, it's the lower body of the War Sphinx that we've seen before, with just the upper body of like not a bone giant, but like it's that size basically. So think of the dragon ogres. Think of Kolek, actually. If you've watched anything for the Chaos and you've seen Kolek, think of a Necro Sphinx for him, or think of him when you think of a Necro Sphinx. Only the Necro Sphinx is like a bit smaller, but this thing still is going to be really huge. And you can see it has huge blades on its arms. It has special rules for doing decapitating strikes in the tabletop, where it just does like instant kills on characters and such. And it can have poison attacks on its tail and stuff like that. And you can just see it looks crazy. It can fly, if you can imagine that, with the wings it has. And it causes terror. So yeah, it's going to be scary. It's so cool looking. But yeah, we'll move on. So then we have flying monsters, and we just have carrion. These are just going to be your flying, harassing unit, take out enemy archers and artillery and stuff. They're just big vultures, essentially, undead vultures. I think they're undead anyway. And yeah, there's not much to really say about them. They're not like the most interesting unit in the world, but that's what they'll be for, taking out enemy artillery and such. So then we move on to our own artillery, and we have the Screaming Skull Catapult. So this is a morale shock and damage, of course, catapult. And it's going to be really cool to see that. So the ammunition of the Screaming Skull Catapult is the Screaming Skulls, and in the tabletop, these are magical and have the Flaming Attack special rule. And they cause panic tests on enemy units that they hit. So it's quite interesting. It'll be fun to see them in the actual game, years from now probably. Just blowing stuff up with that and causing terror and stuff. It's going to be quite cool. So then to finish off the Tomb King's army, we have the Casket of Souls. Now the Casket of Souls is another unit that has set spells for it, whereas it's a magical unit that doesn't use lores. It just has its own special rules put onto it. So they have one called the Light of Death, which is at power level 5. Now power levels for mages basically show how powerful they are, and 5 is almost impossible for anybody to get to except for certain characters, one of which being a Tomb King's character, the other being High Elves, and one being Lizardman. There might not be a High Elves one, but well, I might be wrong about that. But anyway, but just to read the rule, the Casket of Souls can use the spell as long as the Keeper of the Casket model is alive, and the Casket of Souls has not moved this turn. Light of Death is a direct damage spell with a range of 48 inches, which is really big for the tabletop. The target of Light of Death must take a leadership test on 3d6, adding the results together. If the test is passed, nothing happens. Otherwise, for each point the unit failed to testify, it suffers an automatic wound with no armor saves allowed. So imagine a unit of orcs with leadership 5, I think, 6, 7, I don't know. Either way, you roll 3d6, you get 18. That's like a dozen or more orcs dead from this, and you can do that every turn. And it's pretty cool. It's going to be devastating. The Casket of Souls is something that like pretty much every Tomb King's player brings because of how good it is. Another rule is it adds more power to your dice pool for magic. So basically, Winds of Magic for the Tomb Kings aren't gonna matter as much if you have a Casket of Souls, because it's gonna add magic to your pool. So it'll regenerate your magic faster, I guess. And if it's destroyed, roll a d6 for every unit within 12 inches of the casket before it is removed from play. On a 4+, that unit immediately suffers d6 strength 6 hits. So basically it explodes. The souls from the casket erupt out and just kill a bunch of people. Think of the Ark of the Covenant, basically. It just melts everybody around it, essentially. The Ark of the Covenant from Indiana Jones. It's basically what it is. And yeah, it just kills people all around it and stuff if it dies. So yeah, that is the roster for the Tomb Kings. Now we have to move into the final section, which is the Legendary Lords. So first off, let's get right into this. We have Settra the Imperishable, the great king of Nehekara. So Settra the Imperishable is the king of all Tomb Kings. He is a ruthless leader whose thirst for conquest knows no bounds. Settra's power is far greater than any other Tomb King, and his unyielding will is such that he never needs to return to his sarcophagus to rest. Instead, he chooses to remain awake, the ruler of a devastated land. The immortality he lusted after in life is now his, and the civilizations that flourished in his absence feel his wrath. So, Settra is going to be your faction leader. That is just obvious. And he is going to be a melee caster. He has a little bit of magic ability due to his research with the cult that he created with the Lich Priests. So, yeah. He's going to be he's a really good melee lord, of course. He's going to be doing a lot of damage, and he has quite a few magic items. So we take a look at the first one. He has the Crown of Nehekara. Basically, the rule I talked about earlier with Tomb Kings making units they join better. He has a bubble instead of in the tabletop. He has a bubble instead of just the unit he's with. So maybe in Total War he'll have a huge bubble that does that. I don't know. His other magical item is the Chariot of the Gods, and now in the tabletop, Settra is only on his chariot. So I'm not quite sure if he'll only be in the chariot in Total War. If you have to go through a quest to get it, who knows? But Settra rides a scythe chariot drawn by 4 skeletal steeds. Its profile can be found above. Whatever. Hits from the Chariot of the Gods are magical attacks that have the Flaming Attack special rule, and it has an armor save of 4+. So it's a really tough chariot, and it causes magic flaming attacks. So yeah, it's going to be really dangerous. And it's scythed, of course, so it's just going to be running through units causing magic flaming attacks. That's crazy. He has the Scarab Brooch of Usurian, which just gives him a 4+ ward save and magic resistance, so that just makes him tougher against magical attacks, basically. And then he has the Blessed Blade of Petra, which is a magic weapon that causes flaming attacks. It negates armor, and any character that gets wounded by it, it makes them a worse fighter. So Cetra is going to be really dangerous in battle, and his chariot's just going to absolutely wreck units. It's going to be really interesting to see him. We then next have High Queen Khalida. So Khalida, the warrior queen of Liberos, was highly respected across all of the lands of Nehekara. Her intelligence and bravery were as legendary as her intense sense of honor and justice. Her reign was tragically short, as she was cut down in her prime, and all of Nehekara mourned her passing. Khalida was killed by her cousin Neferata, queen of Lamia, in ritual combat during a great celebratory feast. Neferata desired the death of Khalida, for the warrior queen had been growing ever more suspicious of her cousin. Khalida was right to be wary, for Neferata had attempted to recreate the elixir of life, and in doing so had become the first of the vampires. So yeah, she died in her fight against Neferata. But of course that didn't stop her, because it didn't stop any of the Tomb Kings, because look, they're back now, ready to take on them. So if you didn't get the memo, the Tomb Kings really don't like the vampire counts. They actually have a bitter hatred for them because of Nagash, basically. It is Cetra's, like, maybe not Cetra's, it's one of the characters' like personal goal to wipe out all of the vampires. So yeah, they don't like them that much. But anyway, we're just going to talk about the magical items of Khalida. She has the incarnation of the Asp Goddess. So we're going to be talking about Khalida's like special rules and such. Poison attacks do not wound Khalida in the way that most units get wounded by poison. She's quite resistant to poison attacks, and she makes archers around her better. So that's quite interesting. So archers will be better around her. She has one magical item, the Venom Staff, and this has a bound spell, which is power level 5, so it's really good. And it's a magic missile with a range of 24 inches. The target takes 2d6 strength for hits. So that's quite cool, just to use every turn. It's just a magic missile that just causes damage. So quite cool. She's just going to be a support kind of character. She has the hatred of vampire counts. See, there you go. She hates the vampire counts. That's what I thought. She has poison attacks. She's just going to be a buffer. She's going to make the your archers better, and she's going to be casting that spell that just damages people. It's going to be interesting. It'll be cool to see her in. We then have our third legendary lord, the Grand Hierophant Katep. So Katep is the Grand Hierophant of Khemri, the head of the mortuary cult's heretic council. And he alone knows all of the secrets and unwritten lore. Katep is the oldest and wisest of all the Lich Priests and the first member of their order to truly deny death's embrace, if not the ravages of time. He is ancient beyond memory, cadaverous and hunched over as if he carries the weight of epochs upon his shoulder. Following the casting of Nagash's great ritual, civil war threatened to destroy Nehekara. Katep therefore took it upon himself to restore order. He broke the magical seals of the Grand Pyramid of Khemri and awoke the greatest of the Tomb Kings, Cetra. At the end of the mighty incantation, Cetra arose and smote any who opposed him. Before long all bowed their heads to Cetra, and though he once more sat upon the throne of Khemri, his wrath was great. Cetra was angry foremost with the mortuary cult, believing they had whispered lies about the extent of their powers. In his fury, he exiled Katep from Khemri and forbade him to set foot within any of the great cities until such time as he could fulfill the mortuary cult's ancient promise and reinstate the golden age of Nehekara. So basically, the mortuary cult promised Cetra that they could give never-ending life, basically. But that was, of course, ruined by Nagash and all the other problems that happened. And they were all turned into skeletons and mummies and such. So Cetra was really pissed about that, so he cast Katep out until he could finally bring everyone back to life, essentially, and make them all human again, which, of course, doesn't happen, as you know, with end times, but we're before the end times, so we don't have to worry about that. But yeah, he's going to be a very, very, very powerful caster, and he has some magic items. He has the Lich Staff, and that just makes him able to cast things more easily, so I'm not quite sure how it'll be implemented into Total War. But he also has the Scroll of the Cursing Word, which is one-use only thing. When an enemy spell has been cast, When a spell has been cast, you can use it on an enemy wizard, and that stops him from casting any more in that turn, and it also hurts him if he fails a toughness test. So in Total War, I'm not quite sure what it could do. It could like stun lock enemy casters. I'm not quite sure. Maybe stop them from casting for a little bit. I don't really know. It's going to be interesting to see how they get all of this magic balance into Total War. But of course, if anything, Katap would just be a really strong caster anyway. So yeah. We then move on to the possible final legendary lord, and that is Arkan the Black. Now, why Arkan is a possible legendary lord is he's a lord character. He can lead Tomb King's armies in the tabletop. And he's really, really, really powerful. So if he's not in Total Warhammer, no big deal, I guess, but he's very powerful. So maybe they'll keep him as an enemy of the Tomb Kings. That would be cool, just to fight him. But if you can use him, he's insanely good. Arkan the Black was the first and most loyal of the evil Nagash's followers. Arkan helped to lead the coup which brought the Arch Necromancer to power, and he was the first after his lord to imbibe the elixir of life. Arkan was the most adept of Nagash's pupils in the study of dark sorcery, and he quickly rose to become the Necromancer's trusted vizier and principal lieutenant. Arkan led many armies against Nagash's enemies and was never defeated in open combat. In the end, however, the sheer numbers of the Priest King's soldiers forced Nagash to retreat. It was Arkan who led the suicidal counterattack that gave Nagash the opportunity to escape. For over an hour, Arkan held back the army of the Seven Kings through feats of martial prowess and powerful sorcery. Arkan finally fell, not to a hero's sword, but to a single spear hurled by an unknown soldier. Arkan stared in horror at the shaft protruding from his chest, knowing that it had pierced his heart. With his dying breath, he threatened that a terrible curse would befall any who touched his corpse, and with that he slumped to the ground. Within seconds, dark flames had consumed Arkan's flesh, leaving behind only a blackened skeleton. So, yeah, he's pretty crazy. He is, of course, not dead. He came back, of course, after Nagash came back and all that crap. And he rose him back. And now Arkan is trying to bring back Nagash. He's going around trying to find all of Nagash's items that are all around the world. And he actually has quite a few of them, and that's what most of his magical items are. So, yeah, Arkan is going to be a melee caster. He is a level 4 wizard. And he uses the Lore of Death, even if he's your Hierophant in the tabletop. But of course, in Total Warhammer, that doesn't really matter. So yeah, he's pretty cool. He has the Tomb Blade of Arkan, which is any wounds he gives out to enemy units, him and his unit recover wounds. So he heals people and himself by killing people. That's quite interesting. He has the Staff of Nagash, which in the tabletop lets you keep more power dice for magic. So basically, maybe spells will be easier to cast, less mana, or less winds of magic will be taken up. I'm not quite sure. And he has the Liber Mortis. Now, while Arkan the Black is alive and has the Liber Mortis, he's a level 5 wizard, which, like I said earlier, is nearly impossible to get for anybody else. There's only a couple of named characters that have it, and Arkan being that is absolutely crazy. So this is what I was saying. If he is a Tomb Kings character that you can use in Total War, it's going to be really cool for the Tomb Kings. But if he isn't, he's going to be a big problem to deal with. So either or would be nice. Having him would be great. Fighting him would be awesome. You'd have some epic battles against him. So yeah, it'll be interesting. But yeah, guys, that is the Legendary Lords of the Tomb Kings, and that is the Tomb Kings faction video. I hope you enjoyed. Again, sorry for the long wait. I just was really busy, couldn't get it out, but it is here now. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.